Hello, I am Sherisa Nuesa. I am the Chief Finance Officer of Manila Water Company, which runs the East Zone water system of Metro Manila. We're all aware that a number of countries in various parts of the world are water stressed. And in Asia, they say 1 out of 3 people has no access to potable water. It is for this reason that they say that it is imperative that we increase the amount of investments coming from the private water sector. However, as we also all are aware, the experience in public-private partnerships has been mixed. Quite a few have been declared as less than successes, others as outright failures. It is against this background that I would like to present the story of Manila Water, which was born out of the 1997 privatization of the Metropolitan Waterworks and Sewerage System, or MWSS, the government agency in Metro Manila that was in charge of the water and wastewater systems way back then. I will of course talk about how the public-private partnership was born in 1997. I will go through our regulatory framework so everyone would understand what we had to face then, the financing challenges, which were quite important and always remain significant for an infrastructure company. And then I'll go through the story of how we were able to overcome the hurdles into becoming the Manila Water that we are today. Now, I mentioned that in 1997, we had this privatization. However, the correct term is really public-private partnership. And this is because MWSS continued to exist as the franchise holder and as the regulatory body supervising the concessionaires. Manila Water is a service provider or an agent of MWSS. Now, in 1997, what happened was the government decided to privatize the water system because of very severe problems. We then had a very old network. We had a lot of asbestos cement pipes that were leaking heavily, and the physical losses were outstanding, such that the service was very poor. There were a lot of leakages, some water pilferages, and of course, the water service impacted the quality of life of the people as well as the economic progress in the areas. In 1997, what MWSS did was to split its territory into two. The west side became what is known as the Manila Water Services, Inc., and we were assigned the East Zone. The Manila Water Company was a consortium led by Ayala Corporation, one of the largest conglomerates in the country. Our international operator and partner is United Utilities of the UK. Now, what were the key issues of the PPP then? These are very much the same as what they are now. Of course, there are regulatory challenges. There is a need to improve service delivery and customer service. And of course, the financing challenges, particularly because water regulation was quite new in the country. Now, the regulatory framework is quite interesting. Many consider it as a progressive concession agreement. At that time, the advisor to the government is International Finance Corporation, and they were able to put in a lot of provisions that encourage private sector investments in the network. Remember, we had a very poor, deteriorated system, and therefore they encouraged us by rewarding us with a guaranteed return for the investments that we make. So we were allowed to recover operating expenses, capital expenditures, even income taxes, but hand in hand with that, they gave us a set of service obligations. Now, going through some of these key features, it is a 25-year concession agreement. There is a provision for international arbitration for major disputes. This is quite important. Of course, as the concession operation progressed, there would always be inconsistencies that need to be ironed out. What we have in the concession agreement is that rather than the parties go to court there is an international arbitration process enshrined in the contract wherein an appeals panel could be created where both the government and the private sector can designate their own arbiters, but the chairman of that appeals panel is to be designated by the International Chamber of Commerce and therefore free from political pressures. That, of course, also precluded the need to go to court in case of disputes. In addition, while we may have been given a guaranteed rate of return, we were given a set of performance standards, 23 key performance indicators and business efficiency measures that set our service obligations on every aspect of the operation: new connections, collection efficiency, response to mainline failures, customer service, and the like. So we really think that we have a good regulatory framework. Now, moving on to the financing side. Now, remember that this was 1997. Shortly after we moved in, the Asian financial crisis hit us. And at that time, what happened was, of course, understandably, the foreign commercial banks were sort of on the retreat or became very stringent in their standards. They became very selective, and even the local banks as well. Adequate security arrangements were sought. And more importantly, the costs were very high. Interest rates were driven even by, of course, the country issues like sovereign ratings, political scenarios, and the like. And what is interesting is that all of these scenarios are back with us today with the global financial stresses. Now, what were the constraints that the water sector had to face? We were particularly affected because our security packages were limited. As a concessionaire, what we had were pumps and pipes that we could not mortgage. And of course, guarantees were not easy to come by, even from, particularly from our foreign shareholders. And of course, the lenders were understandably concerned with regulatory risks and political risks. So what we had to do was employ a series of innovations as well as various financing initiatives. Now, among our strategies was to shift to the local banks. The foreign banks understandably had a lot of concerns relative to the countries, particularly the emerging markets. So we asked a local bank syndicate to give us our first loan. There were also loan facilities available from the MWSS, the government agency. I'll go into that in detail. And then we accessed now the multilateral banks and the foreign development banks. The local banking system had severe limitation in terms of capacity. There were rules on single borrowers, limits, and the like. And so we really needed foreign banks. And finally, later on, starting 2004, we started tapping the equity markets. Now, this chart shows the concession fee framework, or the MWSS loan structure. As a government agency, MWSS had access to ODA funds, multilateral banks, development banks, and those facilities were made available by them to the concessionaires. What happened was MWSS became the borrower on record. Manila Water got the funds to build the CapEx infrastructure, but we were responsible for the local counterpart funds as well as the debt servicing. We paid back MWSS in the form of concession fees.